I spoke to a speaker a few days ago who had come and addressed you 2 years ago, Shashi Tharoor. And Dr. Tharoor has been closely associated with the organization that I run called I.I.M.U.N for almost a decade and a few years. So he said, Rishabh, you may try to sound like me. You may fail in that. You will try to use words like me. You will definitely fail in that. So please be careful. Please prepare a speech and then go and talk. And I said, when I was in school growing up, it used to be a difficult thing. It used to be a dangerous thing when you were called to the principal's cabin. And today I'm in a principal's cabin with 2,000 principals in front of me. Some of the national executive members, the EC members met me, and one introduced me to the other and said, I would like you to meet our keynote speaker. And the other EC member was looking around for the keynote speaker. Where is the keynote speaker? Even I was looking around for the keynote speaker. Where is the keynote speaker? And she pointed towards Rishabh and she said, that's the boy Rishabh. He's going to be giving the keynote address. So this is the boy who's going to follow Justice Kurian, she said. And then Mrs. Bugley very politely said, hear him out first. He makes some sense. So I'm going to try to make some sense. But can I start by telling you something from the bottom of my heart? There are doctors, lawyers, engineers, chartered accountants. There are politicians, there are bureaucrats, there are civil servants, and every single profession across the country is because of the people who sit in this room. You are the reason why this country exists and why this country functions. So to all of you, my utmost gratitude. Without you, we would not exist. The difficulty in admitting that the most powerful people in our country, and I just want you to reflect upon this, the most powerful people in our country, and a lot of people say the most powerful people in our country are the ones who sit in New Delhi. I've been to New Delhi. My work, that is the NGO that I run, our job is to produce elected members of government, is to produce people who are civically conscious, conscientious leaders of tomorrow, as it's called. But whilst I address a room full of parliamentarians in Delhi, and I'm addressing a room full of people who are present here at this moment, can I tell you, between the two, the more powerful set of people are the ones who are sitting in front of me today. And thank you, sir, for that. I'll tell you why, because as I was walking in and Sister Selvi was doing the maths with me, because my maths is not very good. So Sister Selvi was saying, Rishabh, there are 2,000 odd principals who are a part of this meet. If each principal has about 1,000 to 10,000 students in their school, today by talking to these principals, you're impacting almost 2 crore students. That's more number of people, and you actually impact them. Sorry to say this, the ones in New Delhi don't impact them as much as the ones who are sitting in this room. In Sanskrit, there is a small shlok that goes by, Swasmai Swarupam Samachya Sarvasvam. This means do less for oneself and do more for others. This is essentially what you do on a day-to-day basis. Adi Shankaracharya ji said it long ago, then the Sanskrit Shubhasita came up, and today I'm telling you about the Sanskrit Shubhasita, because I'm going to tell you something a little more about Indianness, because it deeply resonates with what I do, and I'm sure what you believe in. But I also want to take this moment out, and I want to tell you that for a young boy who started off in South Bombay, small urban precinct of Bombay where we believe everything starts and finishes with us, sir. We feel that as soon as you cross South Bombay, you directly reach New York or London. This is true. All those people who've been to South Bombay are laughing. All those people from South Bombay are putting their heads down. So I'll tell you a little bit about myself and then the message that I'm talking about. But before that, I want to also tell you that in education, and the reason why from the different disciplines that I'm supposed to do, why education is something that I'm most passionate about. Today in this country, you've got 15 lakh schools, you've got 97 lakh educators, you've got 26.5 crore students. Are you proud of the education system? Yes, no. Yes, no. Jor se bolo, yes or no? I'm sorry, I'm going to interchange between Hindi and English, if that's okay. Are you proud of the education system? Yes or no? Some of you are. And how many of you are not proud of the education system? Make some noise. Could be better. They're raising their hands very politely. See, this is the difference between you and the politicians. Tell you something else, that the reason why I'm so grateful to be here is because all of you actually have done experiments with truth and truly understand the difference between the statement, God is truth, and the journey from God is truth to truth is God. You understand that Voltaire and Vivekananda spoke about the same thing, and you understand the power of truth. But I'm like the few people who raised their hands and who basically said that I'm not very happy with the education system. I'll tell you why. Every year, 25 lakh students graduate. 7.5 lakh students don't get a job. Unemployment in illiterate people is only 3.8%, but when it comes to literate graduates, the unemployment shoots up to 29.5%. This is the sad reality of our country. And the sad reality of our country is this because of the fact that our education system, and I'm sorry because this is a room full of educators, so sometimes people say, Rishabh, itna kadwa sach mat bolo. So I said, it is important to speak the truth. And my experiments with truth taught me that. But the idea that we are unable to come to a solution from 1968, the first education policy, 1986, the next education policy, 2020, you changed national policy on education and made it national education policy. Fantastic. The first education policy said 6% of your GDP should be dedicated towards education. Your next education policy said 6% of your GDP should be dedicated towards education. The next, that is the third education policy, also said the same thing. My question to you, from 1968 to 2024, show me one government that has actually dedicated 6% of the GDP to education. Not one government, BJP or Congress or any other government, has dedicated more than 3.5% to education. Not one government from the 3.5% has been able to spend more than 70% of that 3.5%. That means they say we don't know where to spend the money on education. This is the state of education in our country. Year on year, we get people who are unemployed. Year on year, we get the same education system going on in circles. In my humble opinion, there's nothing left in the right and there's nothing right in the left. But what happens time and again? 3 people got the joke, and I'm grateful for those 3 people. And then some of you didn't get the joke, and I'm very grateful for all of you. Please don't take anything too seriously. Look at my hairstyle. Whenever it gets too serious, just look at my hair and dial it down. I'm stuck somewhere between Kapil Sharma and Veer Das. You know Kapil Sharma? Of course you know him. You know Veer Das? Of course you know him. Stuck somewhere between the two of them. The problem we face, let me come back to this. The problem we face, the biggest gremlin of our time, we know the problem. The problem is that the British education system has produced more Britishers than the British have. Do you agree? Yes or no? We're stuck in binaries. We're stuck in left and right. We're stuck in yes and no. We're stuck in ICSE, CBSE. Though that debate I'll settle. Because somebody asked me saying, which is the better board? I proudly said, I studied in an ICSE school. I'm particularly enjoying myself talking to 5 people out here. I'm particularly enjoying myself talking to all of you. I hope I'm making sense at the back. Yes, no? Okay, fantastic. Going to be some sharp questions at the end saying backbenchers, Rishabh, are actually the smart ones. So like I was mentioning, that it is imperative for us to understand that the British education system has divided us into binaries of yes and no. I come from a slightly different school of thought. The curriculum definitely needs to be revamped. Definitely there needs to be a lot of change in education. But we need to start seeing things not from the English lens, but from the Indian lens. And what do I mean by the Indian lens? For me, the understanding of the Indian lens comes from my family, from how I grew up, but more so from my reading. And my reading of this small little set of books of Advaita Vedanta basically teaches me that one should not live life in binaries, but there is universal oneness in everything. It's important for us to see everything as one and not define it in binaries. If we keep defining it in binaries, then the problem is that we're going to be in the same cyclical loop again and again and again. I can't give you solutions on how to come up with a better curriculum because you do that. I can't give you solutions on what to better in the education system because you know that. I can't tell you how to make students job ready because you are already doing that. What I can definitely tell you is my own personal experience of studying in a very good school, but being exposed to Shakespeare and not being exposed to Kalidas. I can tell you what I can personally tell you is, as I grew up, I read Prince's Machiavelli, but I didn't read Chanakya's Arthashastra. Today, for all the trigonometry and for all the sine, cos, tan, and theta, people are unable to come to terms with a plus b square. And this is the reality of the times that we live in. That people cannot even define that much. Like I said, I grew up in an urban precinct of South Bombay. I was about 18 or 19, and my tryst with destiny, or my tryst with India, began then. At 18, I had gone overseas for a competition, a Model United Nations competition. And I finished first and I came back and I went to my grandfather. I was a presumptuous teenager. Year was 2010-11. I was a presumptuous teenager. I would like to now believe I'm a presumptuous adult. I went to my grandfather, I looked at him and I said, Dada, Gujarati, I'm Gujarati. So I looked at him and I said, Dada, I will now lead the family company. My grandfather looked at me, please look at me today. Now imagine me in 2010. He looks at me and he said, Rishabh, you're 19 years old, you're 18, 19 years old. What do you know about the family company? So I said, what is there to know? It's been going on since 100 years, so I will run it now because I won a debate competition. The confidence. So my granddad asked me, saying, how many cities in India have you been to? Please understand the locus standi that I was coming from. I very confidently looked at him and I said, 3, Dada. Bombay, Delhi, and Goa. My granddad looked at me and said, Rishabh, it's Mumbai. Second, it's Delhi, you've been twice. And Goa, you go and party with your friends. So you can't count these 3 cities. You don't know anything about India. Then he asked me another question. He said, if you answer this question, back in the day, Shashi Tharoor had just come from the United Nations. It was the talk of the town in 2009-10. I thought I was a bit of Shashi Tharoor back then. Later on, I met him. And then he said, spell glossophobia. I said, sir, I have it. I don't know how to spell it. Again, 10, 20 people are laughing. I am grateful. Long story cut short. Grandfather said, answer this question and I will let you lead the company. I said, not a bad bet. So I looked at him and I asked him saying, what's the question? So he said, Rishabh, tell me which is the first book on international relations that has ever been written. So I said, and I looked at him and I said, this is an easy one. So I said, Dada, it's The Art of War by Sun Tzu. So he held my long disheveled hair from behind and he said, come here. Held it like this and he said, there's a guy called Chanakya who has written a book called the Arthashastra. Go and read it. And as all grandparents do, he gave me a 2-hour lecture. I'll be very honest, I was an 18-year-old, more interested in Harry Potter. I took the book, I took the lecture, heard it from one ear and removed it from the other. I took the Arthashastra and put it way behind all the Harry Potter books. And it was there. That same year in 2010, President Barack Obama, some of you may remember, came to India for the first time as president. And President Obama decided to meet all the important people like the ones who were sitting in the first row, and then decided to meet some young people. So he said, so President Obama and the US government decided that we'll talk to some 100, 200 students. So they got 99 smart people and 1 over-smart person. And President Obama, just like this, a very charismatic speaker. And for me, President Obama back in the day was, let me be honest and say this, for me, he was like the biggest thing, because when it came to international relations, public speaking, etc., there was nobody better than Obama. So meeting Obama one-on-one, shaking his hand was like the biggest thing to have ever happened. So President Obama comes up and then he starts his speech, and this is a publicly recorded lecture at St. Xavier's College, and he says in Bombay, and he says, the world has so much to learn from India. For example, Sham, Dam, Dand, Ved. I said, ye to suna hai. I've heard this before. I went back home. I went to my grandfather. I asked my grandfather, did you call him? My grandfather looked at me and said, sorry for the slang, what a stupid boy. If I had a hotline to President Obama, you think I'll be talking to you? Our company would be running in 200 countries across the world. He said, now go and read your Arthashastra. So I went and I picked up the book, The Arthashastra. Today, if you ask me a question on the Arthashastra, I will have no clue. I will have no understanding of the Arth or the Shastra. Back when I was 19, I did not have a clue. But I got exposed to the Arthashastra when I was 19, then I read the Mahabharata, then I read the Ramayana, then I understood that there is something in J.K. Rowling's books which is very captivating. But the Mahabharata is also not a bad story. There's much to learn from there as well. You see, for far too long, we've been talking about mental health. How many of you talk about mental health in your school? Raise your hands. All the principals who've been dealing with mental health problems themselves. Because of the students in school. The parents who cause the mental health problems are all willingly raising their hands saying, yes, we are victims. As I told a good lady who runs a big empire, and she started an entire trust to deal with mental health. I asked her, ma'am, can I ask you a question? I've known her since I was a little child, so I said she'd come for a conversation, so I asked her a question. I said, ma'am, can I ask you a question? After the conversation got over, and she said, yes, Rishabh, ask me. What do you want to ask me, which you've not already asked me? So I said, ma'am, there's a small difference between Western psychiatry and Indian psychiatry. And she said, Rishabh, what is that? I said, in the West, there's a concept called patient-client confidentiality. Have you heard of this concept? Yes. In India, when something is wrong with Stuti, 19-year-old Stuti, Stuti, say hi. Hi. So when something is wrong with Stuti, her mother already knows the solution. Her mother may not know the solution, but her grandmother definitely knows the solution. And if her grandmother doesn't know the solution, her grandmother's best friend definitely knows what is wrong with Stuti. India, you see, is a deeply familial society. It is not an individual society. It is not made by those fragments that you want to try to combine together. It is a whole in itself, and which is why Western psychiatry and Indian psychiatry should be seen slightly differently. She looked at me and she said, Rishabh, this is interesting. Tell me more. I said, ma'am, you spent $300 million. Can I get 10% of that? I gave her a book. I offer you the same. It's called Charaka Samhita. The first mention of the word mental health is done in the book, Charaka Samhita. Problem is, nobody's read the book. I read the Arthashastra. I read all of these books. I understood that there's much about India, and so we started a small organization called IIMUN. I'm sure you're not familiar with this, but I want to quickly ask by a show of hands, how many of you are familiar with Model United Nations? Great. How many of you have sent your students to some Model United Nations? Great. How many of you have used a Baiju product? Not so many hands up. Reason I ask this question is, in 2011, both these organizations started. One's called I.I.M.U.N, one's called Baiju. Interesting story. I like Baiju. I've met the people who run it. They're very nice and sweet people. And we started I.I.M.U.N. I.I.M.U.N is run by 16 to 22-year-olds. I was 19. So we started the organization for school children, thinking all those who are younger to me will listen to me. I don't need to tell you this, but later I came to know that those who are younger to me will teach me. The 13 to 19-year-olds were the ones that we did this for. What did we do? We organized a Model United Nations conference, but the Indian way. The Indian way meaning what? On the first day, there were speakers who came and engaged in colloquy. This was interspersed by Indian song and dance. There was A.R. Rahman who was performing. There was Shashi Tharoor who was speaking. There was Piyush Goyal who followed that. And when Virat Kohli speaks, you see the difference between Virat and me is he combs his hair. When Virat Kohli comes and speaks, automatically your school children listen. When they speak about India, your school children listen. When these people talk about India, there is suddenly your students and people like me will take notice and cognizance of what is happening on stage. This happens on the first day. On the second day, they have yoga and Ayurveda in the morning. Everybody does not perform to Baba Ramdev. He's a nice guy. But I don't think a 13-year-old today in your school may necessarily vibe with him. Some may not. People come and they perform yoga. Students learn yoga. Then there is a debate on international issues, but from the Indian lens. For example, Russia and Ukraine, the war, first read Arthashastra and then solve the war. Talk about mental health, but first read Charaka Samhita. This is what happens on the second and the third day. This happens in schools. We started it. Please remember, it's run by 16 to 22-year-olds. At 22, we send them out saying, do something better in life, and they do something better in life. Some go on to become Tejasvi Surya. Some others go on to become Aditya Thackeray. Some define India as Nehru's India and Modi's Bharat. I continue to define India as Modi's India and Nehru's Bharat. 3 people again. The idea that the idea of India needs to be spread. 16 to 22-year-olds did this in a non-profit organization. Today, in a show of hands of how many of you know Model United Nations, please raise your hands once again, please. Thank you very much. And how many of you used Byju's? Raise your hands once again, please. And this is what I'm trying to tell you. The reason why I'm saying and emphasizing this once again is this. It was done by students, for students. It spread to now what is over 100,000 schools. But in 2016, late Pranab Mukherjee sir told me this, saying, Rishabh, why are you talking about the United Nations? You're talking about Indian issues. You're talking about the Lok Sabha, you're making people wear Indian clothes, they're eating Indian food. You're going to Japan and students out there are becoming Narendra Modi and Rahul Gandhi. Somebody's becoming Birbal and somebody's becoming Akbar. So why are you calling it Model United Nations? I said, sir, this is a great point. So he looked at me and he said, did you need a president to tell you this great point, Rishabh? I said, sometimes ordinary things don't strike ordinary people. And we changed it. And that's my biggest mistake. And I was talking to some of the EC members, and they said, and this was my biggest mistake, we called it Model United Nations. We shouldn't have. We should have called it Movement to Unite Nations. So we changed it from Indian International Model United Nations and made it India's International Movement to Unite Nations. And in that, we tried to unite the world the Indian way. We're 16 to 22. What do we know? We're 16 to 22. At 22, we push them out. Why? Because you need to be naive, you need to be foolish, you need to be really, really innocent to be working in the organization. Beyond 22, you have a lot more important things to do. So it's 16 to 22 for 13 to 19 of now, which is 12 to 19. The reason I'm here, of course, is to tell you that the Indianness sometimes is lost. The Indianness is lost both in our schooling system and in Model United Nations. Stuti is looking far too serious. Stuti, is it too serious? No. Are you sure? Okay. Stuti is my happiness denominator. Great. So, the Indianness sometimes is lost. The Indianness in MUN is also lost. So we started something called free MUN clubs. Now we have this all across India, and for any of the schools that want it, and of course we'd be very happy to, we made a curriculum. And who's made this curriculum? 2 sets of people. One guy called Amish Tripathi and another extreme called Ram Guha. Amish and Ram and people like them have come together and prepared a curriculum which basically talks about spreading Indianness and leadership development the Indian way. This is taught to schools, to educators, and then the educator basically runs it in the school pro bono, and this 30-week curriculum is for grade 7 and upwards. The idea of doing this is to re-establish the Indianness in schools. Swami Vivekananda once said, give me 100 young people and I will revolutionize this country. The problem back then was there were only 150 million people. Today we have 1.4 billion people. We need many more young people who understand India. My humble opinion, not Nehru's India and Modi's Bharat, but Nehru's Bharat and Modi's India. This is essentially what needs to be passed on to the next generation and the generation after that, where politics from education should be removed and it should be only education left alone. That's the line that got me the maximum applause. Had I known, the entire speech would be on that. Well, I'll come towards what I was supposed to speak in a small way also about and touch upon this is doing it with a small concept like MUN in terms of understanding India is one thing, but also doing it in another space with all your life skills is another important aspect. I feel that every life skill that is imbibed in schools should be done the Indian way. Yes, curriculum needs to be done through NCERT, plus then your board will decide and so on and so forth. But at the same point in time, there's a lot of flexibility given to every school who's sitting out here to be able to imbibe Indianness in their students. And I'm sure you're already doing it. I was invited sometimes when they don't find Shashi Tharoor. Or sometimes when you don't get Gaur Gopal Das. Or you're looking for Veer Das, but you want a cheaper comedian. So I was invited to one of these schools for a Nukkad Natak in Bombay. And I was invited to that school and they were doing a Nukkad Natak, sir. I was impressed. In the Nukkad Natak, there was a rendition of Macbeth. And there was also an Indian play on Akbar and Birbal. And I was mighty impressed. And I said, ma'am, this is the best thing that I have seen. And she said, Rishabh, you need to step outside South Bombay. I said, ma'am, point taken. So here I am from South Bombay to Bhubaneswar, and one of the things that I can say is that people say that you don't finish life without seeing the Char Dhams. Very happy that I was able to make it to one of the most important places in the country and the world. But for me, this has been even more special because the people who are in front of me, life skills is also equally important, and enabling life skills the Indian way is equally important. Do you guys agree? Life skills the Indian way are important? Yes. 9-10 people are agreeing, some are raising their hand, some are like, yes, we agree with you, Rishabh, I'm recording you on the phone so I can show it to my child and tell him, I met a young boy, perhaps you know him, he doesn't know me. My job in a world full of VIPs is to be a P. Manje? In Marathi, because I'm from Maharashtra. My job essentially is in order to be in the shadows, in the background, to not be seen or to be known. My job is just like yours. Is essentially to be unseen, and then the products that come out are the ones that make you most proud, and sometimes you wonder saying, so what went wrong? At I.I.M.U.N 16 to 22, there are 2-3 exceptions. One of them is with me, and I've borrowed him here because I traveled from Miami to Heathrow, and from Heathrow to Bombay, Bombay to Delhi. And then in Delhi, there was a bit of a problem. Because in Delhi, you see, we lose clarity. Because you can't see. So to get better clarity, I got him all the way from Delhi and I said, listen, Abhishek, please come and spend some time with me. He said, Rishabh, I have to do some work. There are only 3 or 4 of us who are about 22 who run this organization. He's joined me all the way from Delhi. Very kind of him to spend time and come here. And he's left all the high fancy paying jobs, just like how many of you might have entered by chance, but have stayed here by choice. Because to be a principal of a school, it's only by choice and not by chance. Just like that, this boy also spent the last 12 years with me as I.I.M.U.N. Ladies and gentlemen, Abhishek Dhawan. Abhishek, thanks for being here. Yeah, come say hi. Many people mistook him for Rishabh. You can tell why. I won't tell you why, because I can get cancelled. Do your children cancel you sometimes? Stuti cancels me every day. Stuti says, don't say this ever in front of an audience. I said, today I'm talking to slightly intelligent people. So I hope they will get my jokes and they will not cancel me. Coming to the last point that I was supposed to make. And then I would hope that you have some questions or comments. The last point that I was supposed to make is life skills the Indian way. Life skills the Indian way for me has been something very personal. In 2021, there was a boy who is an engineer who came to me and he said, he worked with me for 7 years and then he got a big fancy job at a big multinational company, huge digits. Dissatisfied with the job, he came to me and he said, Rishabh, I want to make a real difference in life. There's no real difference in this. I'm getting a lot of money. I said, Aman, you're Marwari. You're a Marwadi. Your parents will get you married in 4 years. Your wife will ask you how much money you earn. Go and make some money. He looked at me and said, Rishabh, I want to make a real difference. I said, okay, so what do you want to do, man? Don't tell me you want to join politics. I encourage people to join politics. That's what we do. But I said, what do you want to do? So he looks at me and he said, I want to enable people to learn life skills the Indian way. I said, that's great. Explain me. Because when I started, somebody asked me this question, explain me, what do you mean by the Indian way? I implore you to look at me. It's half Western, half Indian. Sorry, half Western, half Indian. So he said, Rishabh, I don't really understand what you mean by the Indian way, but I do understand that if Amish Tripathi and Ram Guha can come together to prepare a curriculum for school children, and if we are able to provide an abridged Arthashastra, that basically means that we can actually teach people what the Indian way means. So I said, see, you sound a little confused to me. So he said, Rishabh, I've been working with you, I'm bound to be confused. So he said, I want to impart life skills the Indian way. So he started this organization called Gyansthan, which basically talks about imparting life skills the Indian way. And it's a beautiful concept. And this concept basically, from public speaking all the way to dance. So he went to Shamak Davar, and Shamak is again from South Bombay. So we went to Shamak Davar, and I knocked on Shamak's door. And I said, Shamak, you've been teaching dance? And Shamak's like, yeah, I've been teaching dance. He's like, you've been doing Western contemporary, why don't you do Indian? He's like, Rishabh, look at Tal once again. So I looked at Tal. I said, there's so much of Indianness in this. So I said, see, I've got 7 left feet. So I don't understand. So he's like, I will build a curriculum which is Indian contemporary dance. So he took over Shamak's academy. He built one academy with Cyrus Brocha. He built another academy with A.R. Rahman, with somebody else. And he put all of these life skills, the Indian way, into this one organization. And he called it Gyansthan. I keep telling him the main purpose of Gyansthan should be that it should dissolve one day and every school should be able to teach things the Indian way on their own. The successful message of any organization should essentially be that. And for Gyansthan, there is, no, please don't show all this, is very embarrassing. I look much younger there. The other things are fine. So, yeah, please take this, no? Nikal dijiye. Thank you. It's actually embarrassing. Yeah, they asked me saying, how would you like to be introduced? I said, just say Rishabh. They said, nobody will take you seriously. I said, that's the point. People who take themselves too seriously, there's a problem. Have you heard those 300-page descriptions? So sir has finished a PhD, double PhD, triple PhD. We get the point? Great. So the organization's main purpose in that sense also is to spread life skills the Indian way. And this is essentially what the messaging is. I know you do a fabulous job with teaching your students. I know that you try every single day to try to Indianize things in your school. But I am telling you that there is something more that can be done. Because even to date, we're having people who are more anglicized than the British. And I'm not talking about Shashi Tharoor. 3 people are clapping saying, I love Shashi Tharoor. I can make fun of him, it's all right. What I'm trying to tell you is this, and I will use another Sanskrit Shubhashita to end this conversation. And I've written it in a book which I don't know how many of you have read, but the first chapter of the book is called Nagpur Ki Santre with Mohan Bhagwat, and the second is called Papu Ki Pariksha with Rahul Gandhi. My publisher looked at me and said, Rishabh, you don't love your life. I said, there is something to learn from both of them, and this is what I've literally written. Because when I went to Mrs. Gandhi and I was reading the book out, she looked at me and she said, Rishabh, I thought you were a good boy. I said, yes, I am a good boy. Ma'am, let me finish the chapter. So I finished the chapter, and then she said, yes, this is a great chapter. Publisher didn't think it was a great chapter for the first chapter or the second chapter. We published the book called Nothing But the Truth. Nothing But the Truth. There's a Sanskrit slok that I use again in that, and I'll end with that. It says, Amantram aksharam nasti, nasti mulumanuksham, ayogya purusho nasti, yojakas tatra durlabha. What does this mean? This means there is no man who is not perfect. There is no branch or no tree or no root from which you cannot learn something. The problem that we face is that there is the lack of a good enabler. There's the lack of a good teacher. In front of me are so many teachers. What we need to do, in my humble opinion, is to be able to tell students that you can learn from everyone and anything. And if you can learn from everyone and anything, then I think we will be a slightly better society than what we were in 2024. Otherwise, as I grew up in 2002, there was a great campaign, perhaps ma'am will remember, Atal Bihari Vajpayee ji ran a great campaign called India Shining. Yaad hai aapko? 20 years from now, India will be a developed nation. 2024, I was invited to New Delhi, and 2023, I was invited to New Delhi, and somebody said, Rishabh, please be a Viksit Bharat ambassador. 2047, Prime Minister thinks people like you will run the country and should run the country, and India will be a developed nation. 2024, that in 2047, we will be a developed nation. 2002, that in 2022, we will be a developed nation. In my humble opinion, it is not Prime Minister Vajpayee, it is not Prime Minister Modi, it is not Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. It is the people in this room that will decide whether our country will become developed or not. And in my humble opinion, the people who decide that this country will become developed or not, because it is you, should also understand, and I know you understand, the importance of leaving the colonization behind, not just in terms of letter and spirit, but also in terms of the education that we are imparting in the institutions that we are in charge of. It is my most humble entreaty. For all the Indianness that we spoke about, I will quote a Chinese scholar because I saw some of the people in the end saying, what is he talking? He's also a product of the English education system. He's using English as the lingua franca. Yes, it is the lingua franca of the world. There's no question about it. I'll end by saying this. There's a Chinese scholar that I greatly admire as well. His name is Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu, philosopher, said, Give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. You teach him how to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Lao Tzu said this, I believe in it. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. People who are in this room are not just giving students a fish, but you're teaching them how to fish, and therefore you're feeding them for a lifetime. Ironically, I'm a vegetarian, and this entire conversation was about Indianness. But you've been more than a patient audience, and to be really honest, it's been an absolute pleasure to be able to talk to all of you who paid attention, and to the ones who did not as well.